I didn't say anything for a long time after that. The dishes clinked as I gathered them from the table. Melissa didn't offer to help. She stood up, walked into the living room, and turned on one of those British crime dramas she liked, the ones with gray skies and mumbled dialogue. The sound of the opening credits spilled into the kitchen as I ran water over the plates. I kept replaying her words in my head like I was trying to decode them. I feel nothing toward you. It wasn't even cruel. That's what made it worse. If she'd screamed, if she'd thrown the plate or called me names, at least I'd have something to fight against. But this was just vacancy. Like I'd been erased, not hated. I stared at the ravioli sliding down the drain. I had asked her once, years ago, what she'd want for her last meal. She said pasta, always pasta. Back then, I had loved that answer. Should we try to fix this? I asked, finally walking into the living room. Melissa didn't look up from the screen. I don't think there's anything to fix. That sentence hit harder than the first. My chest tightened. I started, trying not to sound desperate. People go through stuff. We've been stressed. Work's been insane. Maybe we just... She muted the TV. That caught me off guard. Brian, she said quietly, you try. I know that. You do things. You're nice. But I haven't felt connected to you in years. I didn't even notice it happening. It's like one day I woke up and realized we weren't us anymore. I sat on the armrest, rubbing my hands together. I thought back to all the times I tried. Making her breakfast on Saturdays even when I had a deadline. Fixing the ceiling fan in the guest room she never used. Skipping poker nights so we could go furniture shopping even though she always picked what she wanted anyway. Once, I spent 2 hours driving around town looking for the lip balm brand she liked. She barely noticed. Now it all felt so lopsided. Me pouring in. Her turning away. Do you want a divorce? I asked, my voice thin. She shrugged. I don't know. Maybe. Eventually. That was it. No urgency. No discussion. Just maybe. I looked at the woman I'd shared 10 years with. The woman who once cried laughing at my awful karaoke at her friend's wedding. Who used to write little notes on my lunch napkins like we were in high school. That woman was gone. Not in pieces. Just completely, quietly gone. I'll do the dishes, I said. She nodded, turned the TV volume back on. I walked back into the kitchen and started scrubbing the plates. Hard. Like I could scrape off the numbness. My brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was tired, maybe we needed a vacation, maybe we needed therapy, but deep down I knew the truth. Whatever we'd had, whatever I had been holding onto, it had already broken. Not tonight. Not last week. A long time ago. And she just waited for me to catch up. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, which was unusual. For a second, I forgot everything. I rolled over to say good morning like I used to, then realized Melissa wasn't there. She had started sleeping in the guest room. No announcement, no explanation. Just a quiet migration down the hall like someone slowly moving out without packing a bag. I got dressed like usual. Tie. Belt. Blue shirt I always wore on Mondays. I made coffee, poured 2 mugs out of habit, then dumped hers down the sink when I remembered. She came downstairs 10 minutes later, hair pulled back, eyes half-lidded. Not tired, just uninterested. Morning, I said. Hey, she replied, like I was the mailman. No smile. No warmth. Just one word to acknowledge I was standing there. She grabbed a banana, took her travel mug, and walked out the door without another word. I stood there in the kitchen for a while, holding my mug like it weighed 20 pounds. That's how the next few weeks went. We still lived under the same roof. We ate dinner at the same table. But it was like sharing space with a stranger who didn't owe you anything. She never asked how my day was. I stopped asking about hers. We talked about logistics, dry cleaning, utility bills, whether the HOA fees had gone up. But that was it. Everything else was silence. Melissa started treating the townhouse like a hotel. She'd come home late, go straight to the guest room, leave her dishes in the sink, and vanish again the next morning. Sometimes I didn't even hear the door open. It was like she mastered the art of disappearing while still being physically present. I didn't explode. I didn't yell. Part of me wanted to demand some kind of answer or apology. But I was too tired. I'd been tired for years, honestly. Not from work. Not even from her. From pretending everything was still normal. Instead of fighting, I started making space. Quietly. Carefully. I threw away the anniversary cards we kept in the drawer by the fridge. Tossed the souvenir magnets we got from our Niagara trip, the one where we argued the whole time in the car. I stopped buying groceries for 2. Just pasta, sauce, coffee. 1 kind of cereal. I reclaimed my half of the dresser. Packed away her things and slid my folded shirts in their place. She didn't notice. Or didn't care. One night, I walked past the guest room and paused. The door was cracked open. She was lying there scrolling through her phone, face illuminated by the screen. She didn't even glance up. I stood there for a second waiting. For her to say something. For me to say something. But nothing came. I turned and went to bed. That night, I lay on my side of the bed and stared at the ceiling. No tears. No drama. Just a slow, heavy silence that settled over me like dust. The truth was clear now. The relationship wasn't dying, it was already dead. I just hadn't stopped feeding it yet. It started with a run. I hadn't gone for a jog in years. Not since my knees started aching and time got swallowed up by client calls and grocery runs. But that Saturday morning, something pushed me out the door. Maybe it was the silence in the house. Or the way Melissa had left a takeout container on the counter with a post-it that just said, "You can have the rest," like we were co-workers sharing a fridge. The air was cold, dry enough to bite my lungs. I didn't wear headphones. No music. No tracking app. Just motion. Just breath. My legs burned by the second block. I didn't care. I ran until the ache in my chest had nothing to do with her. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and took a hard look at myself. I looked like a man who had been sleepwalking for a long time. Overgrown hair. Eyebrows out of control. Same shirt I'd worn on 3 Zoom calls that week. So I did something small. I trimmed my beard. Cleaned up the edges. Then I went further. Ordered 3 new dress shirts online. Not because I needed them, but because I wanted to feel like I wasn't blending into the office carpet anymore. That evening, I stopped by a stationery store I used to love back in college. Bought a leather-bound notebook. The kind that smells like a second chance. I didn't know what I'd write in it. I just knew I needed a place to put things that weren't work spreadsheets or Melissa's one-word replies. Monday at the office, someone actually noticed. Looking sharp, Angie from accounting said, raising an eyebrow. Trying something new, I mumbled, not sure how to explain that shaving my neckline felt like a rebellion. But she smiled. Not a polite one. A real one. And for a brief second, I felt something shift in my chest, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Presence. That night, I cleaned the house. Not because it was messy, but because I wanted to make it mine again. I started in the bathroom. Took down the silk robe Melissa always left hanging on the door even though she never wore it anymore. Tossed it in a donation bag. Next came the yoga mat rolled up in the corner. Dusty, untouched for over a year. Gone. I removed the framed us photo from the living room shelf, the one where we're smiling on the beach, but I remember we just fought about directions right before the picture. I boxed it up with the others and slid the box into the back of the closet. By Thursday, I was cooking dinners again. For myself. Real ones. Not microwave ravioli. I started sleeping better. Not because anything dramatic had changed, but because I had finally stopped asking for a pulse from something that was already a corpse. Bit by bit, I was peeling off a version of myself that only existed in reaction to someone else. And underneath it all, I found something familiar. Me. Still here. Still standing. Just beginning again. It happened on a Sunday. I needed wood glue and a replacement latch for the bathroom cabinet, something small, mundane. I went to that local hardware store on Oak Street, the one that always smells like fertilizer and sawdust. I was staring at a wall of nails, trying to figure out whether I needed 1.5 inch or 2 inch when someone brushed past me and knocked a box off the shelf. It hit the floor with a loud clatter. Nails everywhere. Shoot, sorry, a voice said. I turned. She was crouched on the floor, already scooping them up, laughing a little. Not embarrassed, more like it was the most human thing that could have happened on a quiet Sunday morning. I knelt down to help her. No worries, I said. You've officially made aisle 5 the most exciting part of my day. She smirked. It's not a real weekend unless you cause minor chaos in the fasteners section. We laughed, our hands bumping as we grabbed nails. It felt easy, uncomplicated. When we finished, she stood and brushed off her jeans. I'm Elise, she said, sticking out her hand. Brian. I shook it. Her grip was firm, grounded. Trying to construct something new, she asked, nodding at the glue in my hand. More like repairing the old stuff, I replied. She raised an eyebrow. Story of my life. We stood there a second longer than necessary. Not awkward. Just present. I work at the museum downtown, she said. We're redoing the exhibit on post-war American design. Lots of mid-century chairs and angry letters about color choices. I chuckled. Sounds oddly specific and extremely stressful. Oh, it is, she said. But you'd be surprised how passionate people get about mustard yellow. There was something about her, a calm curiosity. She didn't talk like she was trying to impress me. She just talked. We finished shopping side by side. She helped me pick out the right latch. I made a joke about the absurd price of screws in bulk. Before we went our separate ways, she paused. This might be weird, she said, but do you want to grab coffee sometime? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because it had been so long since someone looked at me like a person instead of a problem. Yeah, I said. I'd like that. We exchanged numbers. When I got home later than usual, Melissa didn't even look up from her laptop. I stood in the doorway for a second, then walked past her to the kitchen, humming a little to myself. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't waiting for permission to feel good. Elise and I didn't jump into anything. There was no grand romantic moment, no candlelit dinner or whirlwind kiss. It started with coffee at the corner shop near her museum, Neutral Ground. She got black coffee with a splash of almond milk. I stuck with drip and 2 sugars. The conversations weren't flirty or forced. We talked about the city, about books we never finished, about our parents, and how neither of us knew what we were doing with our phones half the time. She made me laugh. Not the polite kind, the kind that caught me off guard and left me smiling 2 hours later in the parking lot. Sometimes we'd sit in silence, just watching people walk past the window, and that felt okay too. The coffees turned into walks. Sometimes she'd swing by the neighborhood and we'd go around the block a few times. I told her about my job, the boring parts and the messier ones. She listened without pretending to care more than she did, but she did care, and that was the difference. I started writing in my notebook after our meetups. Not love poems or anything cheesy. Just observations. Things I noticed. Like how Elise always tied her shoelaces in double knots, or how she said when she was really listening. Back at home, things stayed the same, or at least Melissa did. Still cold, still absent, still silently annoyed whenever I used the washing machine too loudly after 10. But she noticed something. I could tell. One night, I came in a little later than usual. Elise and I had taken a longer walk after dinner, just circling the park. I felt calm. Balanced. I didn't rush in the door like I used to. Melissa was sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching. I took off my coat, set my keys down. She looked up. "You've been different lately," she said. I didn't answer. I just walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water. She didn't follow. But I caught it, the hesitation in her voice, the way her eyes lingered. Like she was trying to figure something out but couldn't quite name it. I wasn't trying to make her jealous. That wasn't the point. There was no revenge plan. I just wasn't orbiting her anymore. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit inside her silence. And that somehow made me visible again. Over the next few days, she watched me more closely. Her eyes followed me when I came down the stairs. She noticed when I started wearing cologne again. When I cooked real food just for me. But she never asked questions. Never reached out. And I didn't offer answers. Whatever recognition flickered in her face, it came too late. The man she remembered, the one who used to beg for scraps of attention, he wasn't standing in front of her anymore. I was someone new. Someone she didn't help shape. Someone who didn't need her to be whole. Elise invited me to dinner. Not just the 2 of us, she was hosting a small get-together with a few friends from the museum. Nothing fancy, she said. Just good food and bad opinions about architecture. I hesitated when she asked. Crowds weren't really my thing, especially not groups where everyone probably had degrees in things like modernist irony or post-war Bauhaus restoration. But she smiled and touched my arm and said, "You'll be fine. Just bring an appetite and maybe a sweater. The restaurant's over-air-conditioned." So I went. The place was tucked into a side street downtown, one of those narrow little fusion joints with dim lighting, exposed brick walls, and menus printed on recycled paper. Her friends were kind. Casual. One guy brought a vintage Polaroid camera and insisted on snapping a photo of everyone before appetizers. I joked that I hadn't been this social since accounting orientation in 2008. Midway through dinner, I realized something. I was laughing. Not nervously. Not politely. Really laughing. One of Elise's friends, a blunt redhead named Nora, teased me for my dad-level sock game, and I fired back about her obsession with collecting mugs shaped like animals. People clapped. Elise looked at me like I belonged. The food came out. We passed plates around. Someone spilled soy sauce. It felt real. Then I looked up. And everything stopped. Melissa was standing by the host stand. Wearing a blazer, hair tucked behind her ears, surrounded by a few coworkers from her firm. I recognized the tall guy with the glasses. She'd mentioned him once. Josh? Jason? Something like that. Her eyes swept the room casually and then she saw me. She froze. For a second, neither of us moved. I saw it in her face, that mix of confusion and something deeper. Not quite jealousy. Not quite regret. Just realization. like she was seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Then her gaze dropped to Elise. Elise's hand was resting gently on mine. Nothing romantic. Just familiar. Comforting. Melissa's eyes locked on that. Stayed there. Her mouth parted slightly like she might say something, but no sound came. One of her coworkers leaned over and said something, and she nodded absently, eyes still fixed on us. Then, slowly, she looked away. Turned back toward the host stand. I watched her shoulders stiffen. She didn't look back again. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just sat there. Not out of spite, out of clarity. That moment right there was the end of our story. No fight. No final conversation. Just a woman realizing the man she left behind had kept going. I turned back to Elise, who was laughing about something I'd missed. I leaned in and asked, what did I miss? She smiled and filled me in. Just like that, I was back in the moment. And behind me, the door shut with a soft click. The chapter had closed itself. Melissa texted me that night. It was close to midnight. I was home, sitting on the couch with Elise curled up beside me, asleep under a fleece throw. The TV was playing some documentary about street cats in Istanbul, but I wasn't really watching. I was just still. For once, that word didn't mean numbness. It meant quiet. Peace. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. One new message. Melissa. I stared at her name for a moment before opening it. I saw you tonight. You look good. I regret what I did. No punctuation. Just a single thought broken into fragments. I kept reading. I don't know when it happened exactly. I guess I thought you'd always be there. That we were just stuck in a hard season. But seeing you tonight, you looked alive in a way I haven't seen in years. I read it once. Then again. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Another message came through. I miss you. Not just who you were, but who I thought we could be. I made a mistake. I know that now. I sat there in the dark, the words glowing on the screen. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel flattered either. Just tired. There was a time when I would have killed for a message like this. When I would have read every word like scripture and convinced myself it was a door cracking open. But now? Now I knew that door wasn't for me anymore. Not really. Melissa was speaking to a version of me that didn't exist. The man who still waited at the kitchen table hoping she'd say something kind. The one who asked if she wanted to fix things while she scrolled through her phone and shrugged. That man was gone. Next to me, Elise stirred a little in her sleep and let out a tiny sigh. Her legs stretched across mine, her foot brushing my ankle like a question she already knew the answer to. I looked at her, head resting against my shoulder, breath soft and steady. We weren't anything official. Not yet. No labels. No declarations. Just an ease I hadn't felt in years. I placed the phone face down on the table and gently pulled the throw higher up over her shoulders. Her lips twitched slightly, but she didn't wake. I sat there for a few minutes longer, letting my thoughts settle like dust in the quiet room. Melissa's text stayed unread after that. No reply. No need. Closure wasn't something she could give me. I'd already found it, not in apologies, but in this quiet moment with someone who didn't make me question my worth. I reached for the remote, lowered the volume, and leaned back. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel haunted. Just home. I used to think healing looked like something dramatic. A confrontation. A speech that cut so deep it left everyone speechless. I thought I'd stand up in a room, say everything I had stored in my chest, and walk away to applause, the misunderstood man finally seen. But that wasn't how it happened. The night Melissa texted, I didn't answer. I didn't even tell Elise about it. There was no need. I didn't want to rehash old chapters with someone who'd never read them carefully in the first place. Instead, I wrote in my notebook. Just a few lines. I didn't reply. That was the reply. That one sentence said more than any argument ever could. In the days that followed, I kept expecting something. A follow-up text, maybe a call. Melissa had a habit of circling back when she sensed people slipping out of her orbit. But this time, nothing came. And for once, I was fine with the silence. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't pride. It was peace. A kind I didn't recognize at first because I'd never let myself feel it. Peace that didn't demand a spotlight, that didn't ask to be seen. Just peace because I had finally stopped chasing people who only ever handed me crumbs. At work, things stayed the same. Spreadsheets, meetings, coffee that tasted like burnt toast. But my posture changed. I looked people in the eye more. I didn't rush through conversations. One of the junior analysts, Dan, I think, told me I seemed lighter, like something had shifted. I just nodded and said, "Been running again." It wasn't a lie. Elise and I didn't talk about labels. We still met for coffee, still took walks. But the energy between us was different now, steadier. We didn't text constantly. There weren't hearts or long declarations. Just two people who genuinely liked being near each other. And that was enough. One afternoon, I sat alone on a park bench near the museum, notebook in my lap. The page was mostly blank, just a few scratched out lines. I wasn't writing for clarity anymore. I was just reflecting, letting things breathe. I thought about how long I stayed in that numb space with Melissa, how hard I tried to patch a boat that had already sunk. I thought about the dinners in silence, the way I used to wait for her to ask how I was doing, and how it never came. Not once. And then I thought about now, how nobody needed to clap for me, how there was no scoreboard, no final scene. No need to prove to anyone that I had moved on, because I had. That night, I wrote just one more thing before bed. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It sneaks in quietly and starts unpacking, when no one's watching. And that's how I knew I was free. Not because Melissa wanted me back, but because I no longer wanted the version of me who waited for her.